let's go back to the question you asked about political orientation and what the values are. And I've done a lot of thinking about this long before I went to Panama to see this. And I've come to the conclusion that we've been sold a bill of goods, and the bill of goods was called multiculturalism. And the problem with multiculturalism is that it sounds like something that those of us who like to interact with people from many different cultures should appreciate. But it's in fact the opposite of the value that we actually hold. The value that we actually hold, I would call Western cosmopolitanism.
Yeah,
Western
that's very
cosmopolitanism, it's the opposite, right? Multiculturalism is the idea that people should not join our societies, but they should maintain their own traditions in an isolated pocket, and that we should effectively reject the idea of becoming one people in the West.
It's just a reduplication of the situation that obtains in the world at large, with no appreciation for the fact that if you bring people together and reduplicate the situation of the world at large with no uniting meta-narrative, let's say, you also bring in all of the conflict. Like, obviously, because the delusion seems to be that now just because they're, and I think maybe it's fueled by an underlying materialism. So maybe the notion is, if you bring diverse people from all over the world, regardless of their culture, and you provide them with sufficient economic opportunity, given that conflict is driven fundamentally by economic need, let's say, or economic differences, that will just vanish somehow magically. Now, I'm not saying anyone necessarily thought this through, but my sense is that the systems of ideas that are motivating these mass occurrences, they have their own internal spirit and forward-moving impetus, and they can be full of internal conflict, and no one really sorts that out. But that's what it seems to be. It's got to be something like, well, we bring everyone together like they are where they already are, but now because they're rich, it's going to work out fine. And there isn't any universal system of values that needs to be preferred other than the plenitude of economic opportunity. And so why do you think there's something to that, right? Because I would say you could make a case, although it's not obvious, that people who are in comparative poverty are perhaps more likely to turn to conflict, although I don't think the relationship is one-to-one. What do you think is wrong with that theory of peace bequeathed by economic opportunity, and why?
Well, let me put it in biological terms. There are two basic reasons for any creature, but especially humans, to collaborate. The most primary reason is genetic relatedness. The second reason is the value that is created through reciprocity. And if you'll allow me to paint with a broad brush, what we call the West, I believe, is most fundamentally about the agreement to put aside our lineages and collaborate because there's wealth to be produced. And this notion, which, it has its roots in antiquity, but I believe that this was accidentally invented in its current form by the American founding fathers. That in essence, in order to confederate the colonies, they built a set of rules that didn't put anybody at particular advantage. Now, they did it imperfectly. There's obviously some glaring defects in our founding documents and things, but in general, they solved this tremendous problem. And over the course of the next couple hundred years, that system was so unbelievably productive by putting the people who were in the best position to collaborate into contact and facilitating putting their racial differences aside. We became a powerhouse. And so the American experiment became contagious, because once people saw how dynamic it was and what a high price they had been paying for putting their genetic relatedness first, everybody wanted to join it. So that is, to me, the West. And although I am a patriotic American, I'm also I am a patriot of that idea. I think it is the thing that we should rally around. And what it means is that we should take on this cosmopolitan notion that you can partner with anybody. It's really a question of whether they have the right insight and values, not a question of what God they pray to. And that is now under attack. That is under attack from people who would fetishize our differences and make it impossible for that kind of collaboration to happen. So I do see the West as back on its heels and in need of a vigorous defense, which is part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think the world is in great danger if that idea is lost, even for a brief period.